seats.
It's the plastic created that collector's damage. Well, no, it is an unusual phenomenon, no question about it. But it's the plastic, the one doing the plastic,
Okay, everybody. Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you to Enota and to the second International Ormus Conference. This is an example of what happens when you take Ormus. It's about manifestation, and this is the result of a casual conversation that I had with Barry a couple of years ago that has resulted in now the second conference, which is larger and much more exciting than the first. So I'll be introducing speakers as I go along. And we're kind of a little out of order, and we meant to introduce Barry and welcome you before that. And of course we haven't acknowledged, oh yes, are you waving your hands? Oh, okay. We have a hero amongst us, and that's the man who is cooking for us, Dave Van Dierek, who is also one of our speakers. And I want to acknowledge him because he's doing an extraordinary job. And thank everybody for showing up. Tonight, well, it moved from tomorrow night to tonight so that we can accommodate a fabulous firewalk tomorrow, is my friend Dave Wolfe, and who has been a trooper. He really loves Swan and loves this place, and I'm afraid it's not me that he shows up for. But I send him I send him Ormus in the meantime, and I'm delighted that he does, and he sure does fill the room. And so I'd like to give a big old Ormus welcome to my friend Dave Wolfe.
Right on. Right. I'll probably talk without that. Is that okay if you need that for the recording? You recording? Okay. We will make it happen. I have some chocolate up here, which I will be throwing out into the audience right when you're not looking. So if you fall asleep on me, there is a person in the back with a bucket of ice water ready to go.
All right, everybody, how's that sound? All right, I'm going to move to the front here. Barry, you make an excellent grip. Like in the film industry.
Are you going to give away that poncho too?
I will not be giving away this poncho, unfortunately, although we'll talk about it, and high Ormus content clothing. How about that?
Yeah.
Once I started wearing these kind of clothes, I couldn't go back because everything else is so uncomfortable and so unnatural. You start realizing how synthetic our clothing is. It's so synthetic. Great to be here at Enota. I've been coming here, I think this is my 9th year coming to Enota, and I first met Swan via a mutual friend. And I came down to this place, and it was like I'd been so thirsty to have water like this, and just tuned right into it. And we've been coming back, I've pretty much been coming back at least once a year ever since. And it's great to be here to do a conference on this subject. This is a great subject matter. It's a lot of fun. And I'm going to talk to you about my take on this Ormus stuff, which I've been studying now for 17 years. Right from the very beginning. When I first met Steve Adler at a raw food potluck, our first conversation was about Ormus. And Steve stayed with it, and he kept me on it, and got me introduced to Barry. And we've done a number of events, haven't we, Barry? This is Steve Adler. Raise your hand, Steve Adler, just so everybody knows you. And I have put a lot of time, energy, and money into the Ormus project. Tons of money and time and energy. And I'll never get it out, but it's been an experiment. And it's been a worthy experiment for me because it's about knowledge. Knowing a little bit more about our world. Okay, so the question I want to, or the statement I want to make before we get started is no filming, please. No filming. Only the crew here, if we can do that. I don't want anything showing up on YouTube. It's other than the best. Everyone's stuff shows up on YouTube.
One picture, is that okay?
A picture's fine. Audio recording's fine. Okay. Just not a video would be great. Would be wonderful. I really appreciate that. And he's okay, and these guys are okay, so you don't have to like tackle him and drag him out. We just got back from a long tour across Western Canada. Before that, we were in Ontario. We have a farm up there. where we've been playing around with lots of different sea salt mixtures, Ormus extracts, Ormus gold, all kinds of things. We've got also a farm in Hawaii, and I'm going to give you some of the bits and pieces that I've learned from those places over the years, what we've been doing and how we've been experimenting with this. Mostly, I got into either the gold side of things, so Ormus gold, which we have spent a lot of time, energy, and money on actually totally nailing Ormus gold, and we have nailed it totally. I think more than anybody in the world, I'm sure. We have the exact molar chemistry down, we've got the exact structure of the molecule down, and we just got it on that. And I'm going to talk about that, and we'll get there in a second. But I've also been heavily involved in water research, spring waters. I drank from springs on 4 continents, and I love the whole thing about water. It's really what it's all about to me. And with the Ormus content of the water here, may have been what turned me on to vore trapping to begin with. And Steve and I, way back when, fired up a vore trap there at Eden Hot Springs, and then got involved in developing vore trap technology. Finally got a place with a spring on it to be able to vore trap the water without it ever seeing the atmosphere. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. We'll see some images as well. And trying to track down this stuff in the food chain and the food supply, and we're going to definitely hit that. Where is this stuff in the food supply and in the food chain? What is the nature of the food supply and food chain on Earth? And there are going to be things you'll hear tonight you will not hear anywhere. And this is just my take on it. The other people may have other ideas about it. I'm going to give you my angle on it from my research. Is that good or the best ever? The best ever by far.
Yeah, best ever by far.
By far, man.
All right. It's good to have a team back there. Now, if you guys open a bottle of wine back there, I will not stop you. I will be happy about that. Later tonight, we're going to have a bonfire, so I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take a break. We'll go for another 10 minutes. That'll be it. We'll call it a night. Is that okay?
Yep.
However, after all that next, say, 35 minutes maybe, we're not going to go to bed. We might want to go out and have a little bonfire since we are out in nature, and this is really one of the best places in the whole eastern seaboard of North America. So let's soak it up.
Yeah.
And if you need to pass out, you can pass out right next to that fire. Okay. So our story begins in the upper reaches of the stratosphere, where millions of years ago, if not yesterday, if not billions of years ago, certain spores descended into the primitive, primordial atmosphere of the Earth and landed in the oceans and on the land masses and on the marshes and whatever was growing there, little single-celled algae kind of creatures, and helped to coach along our ecosystem so it could become what it is today and what it has been in the past and what it can be in the future. We'll talk about that. And those little substances, those little spores, are DNA-containing, Ormus-containing reproductive organisms of the mushrooms. And the mushrooms are heavily prevalent in this ecosystem. In fact, there are an estimated 29,000 mushroom species in this ecosystem that are unidentified. The largest in the entire world, right here in this ecosystem. So we want to be aware that, hey, this isn't just like the Arizona desert, actually. This is a very sophisticated ecosystem, one of the most in the world. And this place, in particular, the North Georgia mountains, has withstood millions and millions of years of time on this earth and has never been stripped bare by glaciation. And this spring activity that's going on here has been going on as long as any spring I've ever been to in the whole world. And it's been forested for an extraordinary amount of time. So what's in the aquifer down here is something to take note of. No question about that. I did vore trap, highly vore trapped, 40 Myron glass bottles off this place a number of years ago, and like drip, like really vore trap, drip, 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 filled 40 bottles up. The rest of it went into a bathtub, so it wasn't wasted. And 7 of those bottles, Myron glass, the best kind of glass in the world, disintegrated spontaneously. I saw 2 of them disintegrate spontaneously. And this whole thing about this interaction between silica and Ormus, or glass and Ormus, is real. I didn't believe it. Now I believe it. I've had enough experience to actually really believe it. And so I would recommend, if you're vore trapping a lot of water off here, you take it home in some kind of a plastic bottle of some sort, because otherwise it may not make it. It's trippy to actually see a glass bottle just disintegrate right before your eyes from water. that's here under this aquifer. Okay, now, this is another image here that kind of gives us an idea of what our ancient Earth was like. This is actually Tahiti today, and our ancient Earth was much smaller, was spinning much faster, had vastly more volcanic activity, and was more geologically active, and therefore was actually, no filming please if we could do that. Oh, you are? Okay, great. It was geologically more active, and therefore there was more Ormus materials coming out of the Earth. So I have learned over the years this idea, you may agree, you may not, I put it and test it against your own reality. And that is, the Ormus elements are basically non-oxidized, non-atmospherically exposed metals. They're in the belly of the Earth, they've been down in the belly of the Earth, and as the Earth unfolds and opens up and becomes bigger as it's growing, and volcanic activity drives the materials up to the surface, erosion occurs, rocks get broken, mycelium crack into water, crack into rocks, crack into granite. Then these materials come out, and then once they get exposed to the atmosphere, they pop like popcorn and become a metal. Now, I know that's for sure true with gold. That is the fact with gold. I've studied gold more than any of the other Ormus elements. That appears to be what's really going on here. So when we look out in nature and we see the ancientness of this ecosystem, we see that this ecosystem since dinosaur times, we can go on to dinosaur times here, has been, look at that. We were in Alberta. We went to Drumheller. Saw what's going on there. That was, you know about that. You can go to the next one. Bam. These beings were on the Earth, and the Earth was much smaller and had much greater levels of Ormus on it. And then one more. Okay, and so, well, let's go one more image. There are substances, well, let's back up to the dinosaurs. All the way back up to this first one. Next one. There, okay. So you can see the tree behind there. And this is something that we never pay attention to. I can't even believe when I talk about this, people are like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of it. And that is, there can never be gravity without levity. Obviously, it's so obvious it's ridiculous. And in fact, levity must actually be a greater force than gravity, or there could be no growth. Otherwise, it'd be flatland. If it's 51% to 49 gravity, right? Gravity's 1% ahead. We're all squashed flat. That's the end of us. That's the end of all reality. There can be no reality. There can be nothing. Levity must be a greater force than gravity. Now, the Earth is doing something very interesting in its evolution, that it is eventually developing from single-celled organisms through the help of mycelium, and the coaching, and that's a word I particularly pick, and mentoring of mycelium is actually expanding to multi-celled organisms, especially chlorophyll-containing organisms, that can actually construct chlorophyll-rich leaves and move themselves up into the atmosphere in a spiral formation, developing into eventually trees. And mycelium is mushroom spore, cracked open, eating. When the mushroom actually cracks open and reproduces and it starts to expand, it's that white stuff. If you ever are in the forest and you see a broken down log that's kind of rotting away, and you turn it over and there's a bunch of white stuff, that's mycelium. And the mycelium is an Ormus-eating substance, and that's what its role is here. It makes the Ormus available to plant roots, and it extends plant roots. So let's say a plant's root was 6 inches or 2 feet, it's going to extend those roots by a factor of 2 or 3 times. So the root's that long, the mycelium that long. It expands it so that the actual plant is coached along and helped and assisted by the mycelium. The plant is giving the mycelium sugars, and the mycelium is giving the plant Ormus minerals primarily, and some other minerals, but mostly Ormus minerals, and water. And it's a trade-off, and they're partners on this. The eventual goal of the mycelium is to evolve the ecosystem away from small little single-celled plants, eventually building up to trees and constructing forests. At which time the mycelium evolves and it moves from the substrate of the earth and the dirt and the carbon and other minerals that it is normally eating out of the earth, and moves to a more ennobled substrate, which is wood. And if we think about wood in say an innocent perspective, we see wood as actually a water levitation device. That's what it does, and it does that without friction. That right there violates every theory of physics. And this is what I've learned from drinking spring water around the world. This is what it's actually taught me. Because when you drink spring water from around the world, you find out that the spring water comes out colder than the actual ground temperature can be. That cannot be explained by any physicist, because what they tell you, oh, it's pressure. If there's pressure, it's going to come out hotter. But it actually comes out colder than the ground temperature is. And that right there is a very interesting discovery. Now that's the same type of phenomenon that goes on underneath the shade of a tree, where the temperature underneath some trees can be 6 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the atmosphere. There's a cooling phenomenon going on, or an endothermic reaction, or a reaction that's actually causing organization. Heat causes disorganization, cooling causes organization. And the Ormus materials are actually associated with higher level of organization. As the materials are exposed to the atmosphere, they pop like popcorn, they become a metal, and they are actually in a higher entropy state. And this is why when you had Dennis come up here and talk about sodium hydroxide, and he's talking about sodium is endothermic. It draws heat out of an environment in most reactions that it's involved in. Unless you strip away the chloride and you have sodium by itself, upon which its touch of any moisture at all will cause it to explode, as we know. Most of us who are alchemists. And then it will have an explosive reaction. But in general, in nature, salt is endothermic. It draws heat out of the environment, which doesn't fit any theory of physics, because theory of physics is all about entropy. And what I'm talking about here is ectropy, which is a cooling or organizational energy. And that cooling or organizational energy actually must be greater at all times for any life to occur and for growth to occur. Otherwise, there is death and decay. Just to point that out, because there is never one without the other, there are always two forces. But the female force, the organizational force, the cooling force, what's going on in the belly of the earth actually must be greater than the gravitational explosive forces for life to continue on. And in dinosaur times, this was at a peak frenzy. The earth was smaller, it was spinning faster, the days were shorter, the plants were bigger, the animals were running around with high levels of energy, there was more energetic material in the environment to eat. And this is something that today, as just a little bit of an aside, we have to actually understand and then target and focus on as a primary level of nutrition. Because if we just kind of eat anything, then we're going to end up kind of in the C- range of what food can be if we're clever. But if we're very clever, we can get to the A+ range, which is how it always was in dinosaur time. But today there's not as much Ormus in the environment. It's been depleted, it's been popped like popcorn. There's not as much volcanic activity bringing it up to the surface. There isn't as much oceanic activity, tsunami activity, etc., bringing it up, churning it up, earthquake activity, etc., that makes it more available to us. Rain also, because rain through erosion will bring the materials out. Okay, so this is actually the hidden thing here. Now, let's get back to this tree idea, because the tree is very interesting in that it is hiding something from the atmosphere. Just take a good listen to that. The tree is hiding something from the atmosphere. Within the tree are layers and layers of materials, paper-like materials, actually cellulose, lignins, and materials that are actually, we'll get there later. There are cellulose, polysaccharides, and lignins that are actually constructed in the tree that are keeping out light, heat, and oxygen and shielding the interior tree from something, which is actually light, heat, and oxygen, which cause gravity. Which is, that's not in the Einstein theory. I listened to Carl Sagan and Cosmos when I was 12 years old, and I thought that the Einstein theory of gravity was intrinsic to matter. Actually, if anything's intrinsic to matter, it's levity, not gravity. Gravity is a decay process. Levity is a construction process. And if you are clever and you follow what nature is doing, you can displace gravity. And that's the whole idea of what a spring is. That's Victor Schauberger's entire technology. That's the whole idea of the vortex. That's the whole idea of what a tree does. That's what a tree is. Everything that has growth, and including you, and is able to jump around and not sense your own weight, is actually violating the whole theory of gravity. I had one of the top guys in energetic medicine, Dr. Oshman. I asked him point blank in front of 1,200 people at a seminar we did about 2 months ago, our longevity conference, about the nature of how the bones are stacked onto each other. Somebody had asked a great question, and I was trying to draw this out of him. Somebody asked a question like, okay, the bones are all sitting on top of each other and all that pressure on the joints and all that, how does that all work? And he said, actually, that's not what we're finding out. It's not like that. It's that there's a levitational kind of a phenomenon going on in every joint. Because the actual material that's in the middle of the wood that's being shielded from the atmosphere that a termite larva loves to eat and become a big fat polysaccharide jelly blob, the beginning of the formation of carbohydrates, and that the woodpecker will try to peck into the tree to get at, because that's got the stuff in it, right, and wrap its tongue around its brain and peck in there to get that jelly blob out. That material is exactly what's in your joints. And when you have a mineral deficiency, but not the kind of mineral deficiency that we learned about from Dr. Wallach, but actually a real mineral deficiency, an Ormus mineral deficiency, you actually start losing your buoyancy, your levitative forces. And this is also a result of cooking too. The oxidation of the cooking process, especially frying, actually will flip the Ormus material into a metal. Now that's something that I think most of us in here will agree on. Is that we played around with this long enough that we realize that oxidation and fire and flame doesn't just cause chemical changes. It causes nuclear changes in materials. It causes atomic changes in minerals. And that's a big discovery. And that's why always, as best as possible, we're going to cook anything, we've got to do it cleverly, alchemically in fact. It must be done alchemically. It can't just be open frying in the atmosphere. That's out of control. I mean, when we are born of our mother's waters, so let's jump ahead here a little bit. I've got an image. I like jumping around so much. We'll just jump ahead of this. We'll come back to it. A couple more ahead. Right there. Boom. Okay. It's Gabrielle. There's twins in there. When we are born of our mother's waters, we are actually entirely shielded from the atmosphere. Now that's interesting, isn't it? We are actually just like spring water coming up. We're shielded from the atmosphere until that moment we have our first breath, which is the astrological imprinting moment. That is the very millisecond that we're imprinted with all the astrological data. As the spring comes up, as Rudolf Steiner described, it's an eye that opens and sees everything in the cosmos. And everything in the cosmos, all the astrological data, the location of the planets, what's going on in the atmosphere, everything, boom, is immediately imprinted into that spring water every millisecond, every nanosecond. So that spring water at all times is loaded to the hilt with all the goodies. And my experience with David Hawkins' work has been that the actual highest emanation of love there is, that can only be produced by Coriolis forces and planetary forces, is actually a spring. It's a pure emanation of love. It feeds every single thing there is. It feeds the whole forest, all the animals, all the bacteria, all the algae, everything you can possibly think, from the point where it comes out all the way to the ocean, and then it even keeps feeding even in the ocean. And if you follow the Yukon River out, the Yukon River comes out so cold into the ocean, it goes 50 miles still flowing out into the ocean and doesn't mix with the ocean water for 50 miles up there in the Arctic. And you can imagine all the trout, all the salmon, everything all feeds off of that ennobled substrate. And that same ennobled substrate is really what's in wood. It's in the sap. And that's what, when the tree finally has its last day, it becomes a mushroom. Because the mushroom is trying to take all that levitational material, the Ormus materials, and convert it over into a little tiny, lighter than air material called spore. Which, when the mushroom releases that spore, goes psh. That's how it happens. I always thought mushrooms always release their spores all the time out of trees. No. It happens in particular events that happen in a second. It goes psh. It looks like it just took like a hit of a cigar. Yeah, it's like, and bam, it's all out. And I've seen that phenomenon, and it totally blew my mind, that this mushroom that's sitting in there in that forest for all those weeks of the year, in 1 second, all of a sudden produces a highly energetic phenomenon. I took a picture of it, took 3 pictures of it actually, but it didn't really come out. It really needed to be videotaped, but I didn't know at the time like how rare of an event that is. It's a highly energetic phenomenon when the mushroom comes out. We're going to get there in a second, but meanwhile, let's go back. It's good to put this stuff underneath all our understanding, at least my understanding, because this has helped me. Because when we have this understanding that this material that's in the earth is really coming out and it's then inseminated by the atmosphere and produces a baby, hydrogen, we have some theories to work with. And I've had a number of different experiences in my career that have taught me that actually when you get the Ormus materials in a highly energetic interaction with ozone, you can actually have a baby called hydrogen, which is the embryo. Okay, let's start back, Barry. Yeah, go back. That's salt, by the way. Okay, let's go back here. That's our Ormus lab. Keep going back one more. Okay. Has anybody ever noticed these crystals in their freezer? Now this will occur, this occurred during that full moon that we had on the solstice, that red moon, that particular, and it was an eclipse. So of course we had the water, spring water ready to go to see if it would produce that phenomenon. Of course it did. And that's when it will produce a phenomenon like that, unless the water is extraordinarily high in hydrogen and or Ormus materials. When it's extraordinarily high in those materials, you will get stalagmite formation or levitational substance happening in your freezer, because the Ormus fraction will try to volatilize off. And I think Barry has been very clear in his research that the Ormus fraction will freeze last. If anybody's read the Hexagonal Key, the Water Puzzle, anybody ever read that book? Great book. And in that book, Dr. John talks about, he's a molar chemist, and he talks about the different structures of water, the molar structures of water. And he had revealed in that book that water actually has multiple different molar forms, clustering forms. And there are some water clusters that will not freeze at minus 10, minus 20, minus 30, minus 40. Why is minus 40 important? Come on, alchemists. Yes. You guys are on top of it. It's the same. Celsius and Fahrenheit are the same at minus 40. There are water fractions that will not freeze at minus 100. At minus 100. And that's the research in that book, and that's the actual DNA Ormus water that gets around your DNA. The immediate 10 layers of water molecules around your DNA that define your DNA are actually that kind of stuff. And that's why we're into spring water, because that's available there. Tap water is not available in the same way. It doesn't have as high of a fraction. And we all know it's about percentages and fractions now and probabilities, don't we? Everything is. It's about percentages, fractions, probabilities. There is no absolute this or absolute that. Is there absolute zero? Absolutely not. That was kind of like a chemistry joke, but at least you guys got it. If I did that in another audience, it would be like, in New York, they'd be like, can you shut up and tell us what the hell to eat already? Come on. Like, that's how it is in New York. Like, we came here to find out what to eat. Come on. It's been 10 minutes already. There's a couple other images. Let's go back maybe one, Barry. That one's really good, but this one was a really interesting one that I did in my freezer. And that thing, you can barely see it coming out of the second, from your right side, it's in the second tray. You see that thing coming up? Right there, yeah. And it actually was twice as long when I opened the freezer. And it was so molecularly thin that I literally went, whoa, closed the freezer, ran and got a camera, and then pulled the thing out. But it melted instantly as soon as I opened the freezer. Just the air rushing in melted it. But that's the kind of phenomenon that you'll see. And if you're playing around with a high amount of hydrogen, you'll see this phenomenon. And there is a hydrogen supplement that will produce this phenomenon, which is called crystal energy. Patrick Flanagan's crystal energy. Try it. Take crystal energy on a full moon, put it into your, especially with spring water, into your ice trays, and then watch what happens. Wow. Yeah. Because hydrogen is levitational, so let's go to the next thing. There was a guy, Patrick Flanagan told me there was a guy, there's another image, you can see that phenomenon occurring. Back again. There, okay, that was a little project they did at Patrick Flanagan's house where he was showing me how hydrogen falls upward. And there's an association with hydrogen, Ormus materials, and of course ozone and a high oxygen. And the way I look at that, this is my interpretation. The ozone or the oxygen is male. The Ormus materials are female. There's a person in this room who used to call them the female elements, right? And that has deep meaning to me, because I've observed that when you get ozone right close together with Ormus elements, you're going to have a baby. And let's look at that baby, because I want to show you an incident that happened in his closet. This is kind of cool. Let's go ahead now. It's going to be a few steps up. This is how I normally do my presentations. I apologize, but whatever. We'll come back. Keep going. No, forward. Forward. More. Let's couple more ahead. There. Okay, so this was an incident where we had our Ormus gold, which is distilled water and sodium gold silicate. That's what the product consists of. For those of you who know what that means, because there are sodium gold silicates, 3 of them that come off, And one of them is in the monoatomic form. And if you can separate the others away, which is relatively easy to do, you can have a sodium gold silicate that contains the monoatomic gold. And this particular incident, we had wrapped it in aluminum foil to try to shield it from oxidation, but there was an ozone machine running in Steve's room that caused one of these things to pop. Now, this is the box that it popped in, and you can see that there was no liquid that actually escaped, so it imploded instantly. All liquid completely gone. What was left over is, let's go jump ahead, one more image. The material at the bottom there is actually tested as quartz crystal. There's no quartz in there at all. This tells us a little bit about quartz crystal, and my feeling about quartz is it definitely does contain Ormus materials, in particular Ormus gold. Quartz crystal contains Ormus gold. And so it popped, became quartz crystal, the actual glass completely disintegrated, and the aluminum foil also to some degree disintegrated. Now if we go to the next image, I think you can see here, you can see over there on the right side that there's those white splotching on the aluminum foil. I took that to the best chemist I knew and said, what would cause that white splotching? Guess what he said? Hydrogen. Hydrogen causes that. So this is one of the ways where you start to see that that theory actually makes sense. And it is actually the ancient idea, right? That you mix the stuff of the heavens and the earth together in the right way, and it's going to produce hydrogen, which basically means it's going to produce water, which is the firstborn, which is like dew. I kind of think of dew water as water without carbon in it. It just has, it's hydrogen, oxygen, and Ormus. That's kind of how I think of dew water, at least come to understand it. Okay, so let's just jump back again. Sorry, this is just how it happens when you don't have your own computer up here. There are materials in nature, okay, let's go one more back. There are materials in nature like sea salt. That's when you go out wildly collecting sea salt, sometimes you'll see those stalactites, and you can bust them off, and they're just pure sea salt crystals, and it's wonderful, and they're highly reactive. And if anybody's ever seen that and put it into a bottle, you see that it actually is living material. It moves around in there. You're like, whoa, you come back. If you put dead sea salt in a glass container, you'll find the glass container all filled up with dead sea salt all around. Anybody ever seen that? I saw that the other day. In my own dead sea salt bottle, I went and I pulled it out of my closet, and it had levitated to the top. There was stuff, materials all around. This is high Ormus containing levitational female elements present in dead sea salt and in all salts, and especially sea salt, and it's more active, so it has a charge on it. It's like spring water, it has a charge. If you're doing vore trapping and you're capturing these materials, you can develop such a charge that can spark on you. I've had a number of Ormus waters spark on me, as Barry had shown in that video. And that's like that Meissner field idea, that it has a charge on it. And when you have a dead material, like say an Ormus gold material that we made in our laboratory, then a charge should be put back onto it, which we're learning about right now. I'm learning more about that all the time. I use magnets, but I'm sure that's very minor compared to what could be done. Love to know what more could be done and what your guys' ideas are. I know you've listened to Michael Burberry and how to charge Ormus. That was a great interview you did there, Dennis. You managed that very well. Where did Dennis go?
He's over here.
Oh, there he is. I love that. That was a great interview with Michael Burberry on how to charge Ormus materials. And I have noticed that if you charge them under a pyramid, where's our pyramid guy? Where were you? I just saw you a second ago, way back there. That you can do it for a few days, but then you need to take it out because it will over-energize the material, causing it to pop. And that's, again, one of the things that I've noted over the years is that you kind of want to avoid exposing these materials to a high-energy environment like the sun, like oxygen in the atmosphere, right? Light, heat, and oxygen can change these materials around, if not pop them like popcorn, turn them into a metal. And that's, again, what's going on with this whole Earth thing. Earth, in the belly of the Earth, it's a totally different thing going on in the atmosphere. Because we live in the atmosphere, and we come out of our mother's waters, and we're in the atmosphere, and we don't look, by the way, do we, the same when we come out as we do 100 years later, do we? There's been a change. Because we got oxidized by the atmosphere, we got burned up by the atmosphere, or our Ormus materials are actually popping, becoming metals, and we're changing because of our atmospheric exposure. This is actually the free radical theory of aging. That's really what it is that our exposure to the atmosphere actually can age us. And really what these Ormus materials are is very powerful antioxidants. Right? They're very powerful antioxidants, just to simplify it. So is hydrogen. Hydrogen's the most powerful antioxidant there is. Because by its nature, it pins oxygen, a reactive oxygen species.
Yeah.
I like saying that. Makes me sound like I know something. Okay. reactive oxygen species like O3 and O4 and O5. You have to get O8 or above to breathe it in, but that's another story. You can bubble it through olive oil and you can breathe in ozone, which is great at knocking out like the parasites and all the other stuff, but does not actually change your terrain and can age you. That's the flip side of ozone therapies and oxygen therapies, is that they can age you. Now, if you need it to save your life, wonderful, great, amazing, but I would recommend that we go more towards Ormus therapies, which are therapies and substances that are more protected. They're on the inside of a tree. They're on the inside of the juice of a plant. They're on the inside of your body. That's why you got to be careful if you have a wound that punctures you, especially into a joint. There could be a serious problem down the road, because you have exposed that inner material to oxidation, to the atmosphere. And this can cause a problem to linger for months and months and months, if not indefinitely. Because the material in your body doesn't obey the laws of physics on the outside. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. If you want to just chunk it down. What's going on in the earth doesn't obey the same laws of physics as what's going on in the atmosphere. What's going on inside your body doesn't obey the same laws of physics as what's going on outside your body. Different laws of physics apply. Right? Your whole body works through suction. There ain't nothing being pumped at all. And if anything is pumped at all, you're dead. That's the end of you. When your heart has to pump, you're gone. Because there's no way your heart can pump anything. As we know, if we look at the data on that of how much energy your heart would have to produce to pump and push, it's like a turkey baster. Down to the size of the molecules in your eye, right? From that, your heart, ain't happening. Right? If you try it, you're trying to push like it's a turkey baster thing. The smaller that hole is, the more you're going, no, good. Trying to squeeze that little bit out. Your heart, when you have that, it's a heart attack. That's what a heart attack is. Everything's clogged up and your heart's going, can't go react to the suction. Right? Hunger for oxygen in the cells causes, right? And then the hunger for the atmosphere, the carbon dioxide, goes right back to the lung surface. And that's what's, and your heart's just regulating that phenomenon, actually. And the suctional forces are actually what's at work with springs. The suctional forces are what's at work with a tree. What's actually happening with the tree is that the tree is creating an environment where the water just falls upwards. It's pulled up by suction. And that suctional phenomenon is a cooling phenomenon as opposed to inflammation, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? As opposed to inflammation. Ice cold spring water is anti-inflammatory par excellence. One of the best. You jump into ice cold spring water, whatever inflammation in your body is like, just boom, off you, right away. And that's what I recommend. The Russians had found out in their research there's two things that cause the people to live longest in their country. They found out, first of all, the longest lived people were beekeepers. And this whole bee thing, right, and chitin, and that research that was done by that guy who created that little floating thing out of chitin, or chitin, or however you want to pronounce it, that material that a bee is constructed out of, and that every insect is constructed out of, and that crustaceans are created out of, there's a little cosmic crust. Can we get that one? Yeah. That's a wild lobster. That material that's also in mushrooms, that material has levitational forces in it or something goes on like that. And that material is glucosamine chondroitin. That's what it's made out of. Yeah. Who's aware of that?